Clarke thought the hardest day of her life was the day she buried her mother. But less than 24 hours later, she learned the truth. The real battle was only beginning. Because when family wants something you love, they won't ask for it. They'll take it unless you're strong enough to stop them. A powerful story about love, sacrifice, and the things we realize too late. Inspired by real-life emotions that many families face, and few talk about. If you're over 45 and have ever loved, lost, or wondered if your parents felt seen, this story will touch your heart. Like, share, and subscribe now to HT Family Drama. Family stories that stay with you. Don't forget to turn on notifications for more emotional family stories every day, because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we live through or never dare to tell. The rain had been falling since dawn. Not the kind that crashes against the earth with fury. This was slower, heavier, the kind that seeps into your clothes, into your bones, until you feel it in every movement. I stood under the funeral tent, my hands wrapped tightly around a damp tissue that had long since stopped being useful. Around me, people murmured their condolences in the same quiet, practiced tones. She's in a better place now. Time heals all wounds. And the one I hated most, at least she lived a full life. Full? I wanted to laugh, or maybe scream. My mother's life had been many things, but full wasn't one of them. She had poured everything she had into the people she chose to love, and I had always been second on that list. I shifted my weight, my eyes locked on the closed casket resting a few feet away. The smell of wet lilies and freshly turned earth clung to the air. The rain pattered softly against the green canvas above us, a steady rhythm that felt almost like a clock ticking. It was almost over. The priest was speaking the final words when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, expecting a neighbor or one of Mom's church friends, but it was my younger brother, Daniel. He looked sharp, tailored black suit, tie perfectly knotted, not a hair out of place despite the weather. His expression was solemn as it should be, but there was something in his eyes, a glint that didn't belong at a graveside. He leaned close, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Mom wanted me to have the lake house," he said. "You'll sign the papers this week." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. The lake house. The one place in my life that felt truly mine. The place I'd bought, furnished, and restored with my own two hands. I blinked, my grip tightening around the tissue. The service was still going on. The priest talking about eternal rest, people sniffling into handkerchiefs, but all of that faded into a dull hum. My mind was a flood of images. The first time I'd stepped inside the lake house, the smell of cedar and lake water, the evenings I'd sat on the deck watching the sunset burn the horizon gold, the quiet mornings when the only sound was the soft lapping of water against the dock. And now Daniel, here of all places, was telling me I'd be handing it over. I swallowed hard. The timing wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. He knew I wouldn't make a scene here, in front of half the town with our mother's casket only steps away. I didn't answer. Couldn't. I turned my eyes back to the priest, forcing my face into the same neutral mask I'd worn most of my life, the one I'd perfected in childhood when showing what I really felt was never safe. But deep inside, something shifted. A slow, cold awareness began to take root. Because I knew this wasn't about what Mom wanted. This was about what Daniel wanted, and what he'd been told he could take. When the final prayer ended, people began filing past the casket, each dropping a flower onto the polished wood before moving on. Daniel was already speaking with our stepfather, Harold, their heads bent together in quiet conversation. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Harold caught my eye for a brief moment, and in that glance I saw it. The same measuring look I'd known since I was a girl, the look that didn't see me as a person with my own life, but as a resource. The rain grew heavier as I walked back toward the car. Gravel crunched under my shoes, puddles rippling with every step. I could feel eyes on me, relatives, old family friends. Their gazes weighted with something I couldn't quite name. Pity, maybe, or judgment. When I reached the car, I didn't open the door right away. Instead, I gripped the cold metal of the handle and stood there, letting the rain soak into my black coat. I told myself it was just grief making me imagine things, that I was reading too much into Daniel's words. But in my gut, I knew. This was only the beginning, and the storm I'd just buried my mother in was nothing compared to the one heading straight for me. When you grow up in a family where love isn't divided equally, you learn to notice the small things. You notice who gets the biggest slice of cake, the newest coat in winter, the seat closest to the fireplace. You notice who gets to speak without interruption, and who gets told to be quiet before they've even finished a sentence. For me, it started early. Daniel was 2 years younger, but he might as well have been royalty. Everyone called him the baby, long after he could ride a bike and tie his own shoes. At Christmas, he was the one with the neatly wrapped boxes stacked higher than his knees. My pile was smaller, often with gifts that were more practical. New sneakers for gym class, a winter coat I needed anyway. One year, when I was 8 and Daniel was 6, I asked for a set of watercolors. I'd fallen in love with painting in art class at school. On Christmas morning, Daniel tore into a big box and pulled out a shiny red remote control car. I unwrapped a pair of wool socks and a thick sweater, both in the same dull gray. "They'll keep you warm," Mom said, patting my arm like that made it better. It wasn't just gifts, it was birthdays too. For Daniel's 10th birthday, Dad spent a week building him a bright red treehouse in the backyard. He even painted Daniel's name on a little wooden sign above the door. When I was 12, I asked for a simple swing, just a wooden seat and some rope hanging from the big oak tree. Dad shook his head. "You're too old for that now, Anna." Meals were another story. Dinner in our house was served with military precision. Daniel's plate always came first. 2 generous scoops of mashed potatoes, thick slices of roast chicken, a pile of green beans. By the time the serving platter reached me, the potatoes had cooled and the chicken was mostly bones. If I hesitated, Mom would fix me with a look and say, "Be grateful, Anna. You've got a roof over your head and food on your plate." I learned not to ask for seconds. The unfairness didn't end at home. It followed me into school. Daniel was the one Mom showed up for at every game, every award ceremony. When I made the honor roll in 8th grade, she didn't come to the assembly. "Daniel has a soccer match," she'd said. "You understand, don't you?" I told her I did. But when I stood on that stage, holding my certificate, looking out at the sea of parents, her absence was like a cold hand around my heart. Some memories cut deeper than others. When I was 15, I worked part-time at the diner on Main Street to save for a summer art program. It was the first thing I'd ever wanted purely for myself. Every Saturday morning, I'd pull on my apron and work the breakfast rush, pouring coffee for regulars, balancing plates up my arms. I had nearly enough saved when Dad sat me down at the kitchen table. "Daniel needs new cleats," he said. "His old ones are worn out and the good ones aren't cheap." I stared at him, not understanding why this was my problem. "We were hoping," he went on, "that you could help. Lend him a little from your savings." I remember the sound my heart made in that moment, not a break exactly, but a dull snap. I handed over the money. Daniel got the cleats. I didn't go to the art program. You learn after a while not to expect much, to swallow your disappointment before it shows on your face, to smile when you're told family comes first, even when that means you come last. It became a pattern, so deeply woven into my life that I barely noticed it anymore. If Daniel needed help paying rent, I gave him what I could. If he needed a car, I co-signed the loan. And every time I told myself it was just this once, that it was easier to give in than to fight. But the truth is, every time I gave something up, I lost a little more of myself. I think that's why the lake house meant so much to me. It wasn't just a piece of property. It was proof that I could have something of my own. I bought it 3 years ago. A small, weathered place with peeling paint and a deck that sagged on one side. Everyone told me it was too much work, too much money. But I spent that first summer fixing it up, sanding the floors until they shone, painting the walls a soft cream, planting lavender along the front path so the air smelled sweet every time I came home. It was mine in a way nothing else in my life had ever been. No one had given it to me. No one could take credit for it. And for the first time, I felt untouchable. At least I thought I did. The funeral changed that. Daniel's words, "Mom wanted me to have the lake house," landed like a stone in my chest. And in the days that followed, every call, every message from the family chipped away at the edges of my resolve. But here's the thing. I wasn't the same girl who gave up her savings for cleats. I wasn't the teenager who stayed home from the art program without a fight. I'd built something of my own now, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't ready to let them take it. After the funeral, I told myself I'd have a few days to breathe, to sit by the water, listen to the waves lapping against the dock, and figure out what life looked like without Mom in it. I was wrong. The first call came less than 24 hours later. It was Aunt Laura, Mom's older sister. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the kind she used when she was about to ask for something. "Sweetheart," she began, "I've been thinking about the lake house. And, well, with Daniel's little girl on the way, don't you think it would be just perfect for them? A safe place to grow up, right on the water?" I told her I hadn't thought about making any changes. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough for me to feel it. "Well, just think about it," she said, her tone shifting, a bit firmer now. "Family helps family." The second call came that evening. Uncle Brian. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Anna, your brother's starting a family. You've got more house than you need. It's only fair." Only fair. Funny how fair never seemed to mean equal in our family. Fair meant Daniel got what he wanted, and I got told to smile about it. By the end of the week, it had turned into a chorus. 3 cousins, my stepfather Harold, even one of Mom's church friends, all calling, all using different words, but the same script. They spoke in the same slow, coaxing tones, as if I were a child they needed to guide toward the right choice. Some leaned on sentiment. "Your mother would have wanted this." Some leaned on guilt. "Daniel's under a lot of pressure right now." And some leaned on shame. "You're living there alone, Anna. Doesn't that feel selfish?" It would have been easier if they'd all come at once. But no. They staggered their calls, giving me just enough time between each one to start doubting myself. I began to dread the sound of the phone. Every time it rang, I felt my shoulders tighten, my breath shorten. I started letting it go to voicemail, but that only bought me a few hours before someone else tried again. The messages piled up. "Call me back, Anna. We need to talk about the house. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Family is all we have left." One night, I sat in the living room with the lights off, just listening to the rain against the windows. The lake house had always felt like a refuge, but now it was starting to feel smaller, like the walls were pressing in. I couldn't stop thinking about the last time I'd helped Daniel. 5 years ago, when he'd lost his job, I'd lent him nearly every dollar I had in savings so he wouldn't lose his apartment. "It's just for a few months," he'd said. "I'll pay you back as soon as I'm working again." He never did, but that Christmas, he showed up to the family dinner in a brand new leather jacket, handing out expensive gifts to everyone at the table. When someone asked how he could afford it, he smiled and said, "Hard work pays off." I remember sitting there, my hands wrapped around my coffee cup, biting my tongue so hard I tasted blood. The memory sat heavy in my chest as I stared at the phone glowing on the coffee table. It was ringing again. I didn't answer. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Harold was standing there in his heavy winter coat, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He stepped inside without asking, looking around the living room like he was already taking mental notes. "You know, Anna," he began, This place is a lot for one person to take care of. Daniel's family could really use it. You could find somewhere smaller, easier to manage." "I manage just fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. He smiled, not kindly, but in that patronizing way I remembered from childhood. "Of course you do. But this isn't just about you. It's about what's best for the family." That phrase, "what's best for the family," echoed in my head long after he left. I'd heard it all my life, and it never once meant what was best for me. 2 days later, I was at the grocery store when I saw Aunt Laura again. She cornered me in the produce aisle, her cart blocking the way out. "Have you thought about it?" she asked. "I have," I said. "And?" "I'm not selling." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. "You might want to reconsider. The whole family's talking about this, Anna. You don't want to be the one who causes bad blood, do you?" I didn't answer. I just pushed past her, my heart pounding in my ears. That night, lying in bed, I realized something important. They weren't going to stop. Not until they had what they wanted. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something rise up in me that wasn't guilt or resignation. It was anger. A steady, simmering anger that made my pulse slow instead of quicken, because I knew something they didn't. I wasn't the same girl who gave up her savings for soccer cleats. I wasn't the same woman who let her brother's debt swallow her own future. I had the deed. I had the proof. And if they wanted a fight, I was ready to give them one. By Friday evening, I had stopped answering the phone entirely. I'd even unplugged the landline, letting it sit silent and useless on the kitchen counter. The only sounds in the lake house were the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft, steady patter of rain against the windows. I sat curled up on the couch with a blanket around my shoulders, staring at the fire in the hearth. The flames crackled, casting warm light across the walls, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the house had grown colder over the past week. Not physically, emotionally, like every phone call, every knock at the door had let a little more of their presence seep in, stealing away my sense of safety. I thought about the day I bought this place. I'd walk through it with the realtor, the floorboards creaking under our feet, dust dancing in the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Most people would have seen the peeling paint, the rusted sink, the sagging deck. I'd seen possibility, and I'd worked for it. Nights sanding floors until my arms ached, weekends painting walls until the scent of fresh paint clung to my skin for days. I'd planted lavender and daisies along the front path, so in summer the air was always sweet when I came home. No one had helped me. No one had offered me a loan or lifted a paintbrush. It had been mine from the first moment the keys touched my hand, and now they wanted to take it, as if I'd simply been holding it in trust for them. I got up from the couch and paced the room. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. If I didn't act now, they would wear me down. That's how it had always worked. As a child, I'd been taught that the easiest path was to give in, to make the sacrifice before the argument got ugly. But I wasn't a child anymore. I went to the small desk in the corner of the room, opened the drawer, and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were all the documents related to the lake house, the original deed, the closing statement, the receipts from every renovation. I laid them out on the desk one by one, smoothing each page with the flat of my hand, the legal description, the parcel number, the date of purchase. And there, in black ink, my name. Not Daniel's, not Harold's. Mine. My phone was still in my pocket. I pulled it out and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in years. Thea. We'd grown up in the same town, gone to the same high school. She'd left right after graduation, moved to the city, and carved out a life for herself, far from the small-town gossip and the suffocating weight of family politics. She knew my history. She knew what Daniel was like. The phone rang twice before she answered. "Anna? Wow, it's been a while." "Yeah," I said, my voice low. "Listen, I think I'm about to lose the house." There was a pause on the other end. Because of Daniel. Yes, him and Harold, and everyone else they've pulled into it. She let out a short, humorless laugh. I'm not surprised. You've always been their safety net, whether you wanted to be or not. This time, I don't want to be, I said. Then don't. You've got the papers, right? The proof it's yours? Yes. Good. Then remember this, Anna. If it's yours, you set the terms. You decide who touches it, who benefits from it, not them, not anyone. You've been playing defense your whole life. Maybe it's time you go on offense. Her words landed hard, because she was right. Every argument, every compromise in my life had been about avoiding conflict. But avoiding conflict had never actually spared me from it. It had just delayed it and made it easier for them to win. I picked up a pen and started writing. The parcel number, the deed reference, the date I'd bought the place. I underlined my name twice, pressing hard enough that the pen tore into the paper. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than dread. I felt steady. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the world washed clean, the lake like glass in the early light. I stood on the deck with a mug of coffee, breathing in the cool air, and made my decision. I wasn't just going to hold on to the house. I was going to make sure they couldn't touch it. Now or ever. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about drawing a line once and for all, a line they could never cross again. The sky was low and gray the next morning, the kind of winter light that made everything look flatter, harsher. I pulled my coat tight and drove into town, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles whitened. I didn't call ahead. If I had, Harold would have found some reason to reschedule the conversation. The old farmhouse sat at the far edge of town, where the road turned from cracked asphalt to gravel. I knew every bump and curve. It was the same drive I'd made as a kid, usually with my stomach in knots, wondering which version of Harold I'd find waiting at the other end. Today I didn't wonder. I knew exactly what I was walking into. Daniel's car was already in the driveway, gleaming under a thin layer of frost. Beside it sat Harold's battered pickup, the same one he'd driven for as long as I could remember. The sight of them both here told me all I needed to know. They'd been talking, planning. The porch creaked under my boots as I climbed the steps. Harold was leaning against the railing, a mug of coffee in his hand, steam curling into the cold air. His eyes tracked me the whole way up. "Anna," he said evenly, as though we were about to have a neighborly chat. "You could have called." I met his gaze. I didn't think this was a conversation worth delaying. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Well, come on in." The smell hit me as soon as I stepped inside. Coffee grounds, lemon-scented cleaner, and the faint mustiness of old wood. The living room was exactly as it had been 20 years ago. Same sagging couch, same crocheted blankets thrown over the armrests. It felt like walking into a photograph, only now I could see all the cracks in the frame. In the dining room, Daniel was at the table, his sleeves rolled up, a pen in his hand. Spread out in front of him were rolled blueprints, my blueprints, for the lake house. He didn't look up as I entered, just kept tracing a line with his pen. Finally, he said, "You're just in time. Harold and I were talking about some of the updates we'll need once the house is transferred." Transferred. Like I was just going to hand it over, no questions asked. I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the papers. And there it was, his name, scrawled in thick black ink at the top of the page. I looked at Harold. "You've already planned this out." He nodded slowly, taking a sip of coffee. "It's the right thing to do, Anna. You've got more than you need, and Daniel's family is growing. That place will be better for them than for you." My voice came out steady. "You mean better for you?" Harold's eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone." "I think I've been watching it for long enough," I said. "This isn't about what's better for me. It's about what you can get out of me." Daniel finally looked up. "Anna, this doesn't have to be a fight. We'll make sure you get something for it." Something? I let out a short, humorless laugh. You mean whatever scraps you think will make me go away quietly? He shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. You're being unreasonable. No, I said, leaning over the table so we were eye to eye. For the first time in my life, I'm being very reasonable. I own that house. I have the deed. I paid for every nail, every shingle on the roof. You and Harold didn't lift a finger for it. Harold set his mug down with a heavy thud. This isn't just about you, Anna. It's about family. I straightened. Funny how family always seems to mean I give and you take. When has it ever gone the other way? No one answered. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. I could hear the faint ticking of the old wall clock in the next room. Finally, Harold spoke, his tone lower now. You'll regret making this hard. I met his gaze without flinching. Maybe, but I'll regret giving in even more. I turned and walked out before either of them could reply. The cold air outside felt like a shock to my lungs, sharp and cleansing. For the first time in years, I'd stood my ground in that house, and I wasn't done yet. I didn't go straight home after leaving Harold's. Instead, I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour, letting the back roads carry me past frozen fields and bare trees that clawed at the winter sky. The cold seeped through the car windows, but I welcomed it. It kept my mind sharp, kept the fog of emotion from settling in. By the time I reached the lake house, the sun was low, casting the water in bands of silver and blue. I stood on the dock, my breath clouding the air, and made a silent promise to myself. They weren't going to take this from me, not this time. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, searching for attorneys in the county. Most of the names were familiar. Small-town lawyers who had grown up here, gone to school with Harold, maybe even played football with him. I didn't trust them. Then I saw a name I didn't recognize, Evan Marston. His office was 2 towns over, in a place big enough that the courthouse had marble floors and people didn't know your entire family history before you even sat down. I called first thing in the morning. His receptionist put me on hold for barely a minute before a calm, measured voice came on the line. Anna, I understand you're having an issue with property ownership. I explained briefly about the lake house, how I'd bought it myself, how my name was the only one on the deed, how my brother and stepfather were suddenly insisting it belonged to them. There was a pause. Then he said, "Bring me every document you have. The deed, the purchase contract, receipts for any major work you've done. If what you're saying is accurate, we can secure your position quickly." I drove to his office the next day with a folder so thick it barely fit in my bag. The building was old but well kept, the kind of place where the floors gleamed and the brass door handles were polished every morning. Evan Marston was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s with sharp eyes that didn't miss a thing. We sat across from each other at a long wooden table as I laid out the documents. He studied each one carefully, his fingers tapping lightly on the paper. "This is solid," he said finally. "The property is in your name alone. There's no legal claim they can make without your consent." "Then why do I feel like I'm about to be dragged into a fight?" I asked. "Because you are," he said, not unkindly. "From what you've told me, this isn't about the law. It's about pressure. They'll try to wear you down emotionally until you make a decision you regret." I told him I wanted to make sure that couldn't happen. He nodded slowly, then leaned forward. "There's a way to make this ironclad. You can place the property into a living trust, naming yourself as trustee and sole beneficiary. That means no one, and not even family, can touch it without your explicit permission. It becomes legally separate from you as a person. Even if they try to sue, the property is shielded." Something in me unclenched. For the first time since the funeral, I felt like I could breathe. We spent the next 2 hours going over details. The trust language, the filing process, the fees. When he slid the final document across the table for me to sign, I picked up the pen without hesitation. As the ink flowed onto the paper, a weight I'd carried for decades seemed to lift from my shoulders. This wasn't just about keeping a house, it was about keeping myself. 2 days later, Daniel found out. I don't know how. Maybe Harold had someone at the county clerk's office keeping an eye out. He called just after sunset, his voice tight with barely contained anger. "What the hell is this, Anna? You put the lake house in a trust?" "Yes," I said evenly. "Do you have any idea what you've done? That's not just selfish, it's legal," I interrupted. "And it's final." There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment I thought he might hang up. Instead, he said, "Fine. If that's how you want to play it, we'll see you in court." The summons arrived a week later. They were suing to have the trust dissolved, claiming undue influence and breach of family agreement. It was laughable, really. There had never been any agreement, at least not one I'd agreed to. Evan wasn't surprised. "They're grasping at straws," he said, flipping through the pages. "But we'll need to prepare as if they mean it." So we did. For the next month, my life became a blur of affidavits, witness statements, and legal filings. Evan coached me on how to answer questions without giving them anything to twist. We compiled a detailed timeline of the lake house purchase, down to the date and time of each payment I'd made. I didn't tell the family anything. Let them wonder. Let them stew. The court date came faster than I expected. The morning of, I stood outside the courthouse in my best black coat, my breath puffing white in the cold air. Daniel and Harold arrived together, both in dark suits, both with the same tight-lipped expression. For a moment, looking at them, I felt that old pull, the urge to make peace, to give in just to end the tension. But then I remembered the pen in my hand, signing the trust documents, and the way it had felt, like taking my life back. I followed Evan inside, the echo of our footsteps on the marble floor steady and sure. The courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and paper, clean, official, unyielding. I sat at the long table beside Evan, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from trembling. The judge, a tall woman with silver hair pulled into a severe knot, was leafing through the case file. Her glasses sat low on her nose, and when she glanced up, the room seemed to fall even quieter. Daniel sat across from me, Harold at his side. Daniel's jaw was tight, his knuckles white around a pen he kept clicking over and over. Every so often, Harold leaned in to whisper something, and Daniel would nod, his eyes flicking toward me like I was the one on trial. The proceedings began with their lawyer. He was slick, the kind of man who liked the sound of his own voice, and he wasted no time painting a picture of me as an ungrateful daughter and sister. "Your Honor," he began, "the lake house has always been considered a family property. My client's late mother expressed her clear wish that it be transferred to Daniel to provide for his growing family. The defendant's recent actions to place this property in a trust are a direct violation of those wishes." I wanted to stand up and shout, "That's a lie." But I didn't. I kept my eyes forward, my back straight, and let Evan handle it. When it was his turn, Evan rose slowly, buttoning his jacket before speaking in a calm, deliberate voice. "Your Honor, there is no evidence, none, of any written or verbal agreement that the lake house was to be given to the plaintiff. In fact, every piece of documented evidence shows that the defendant, Ms. Anna Clarke, purchased the property herself with her own funds years before their mother's passing. The trust she has established is both legal and appropriate, ensuring the property remains protected from the kind of pressure we have seen here." He let that last word hang in the air. Pressure. Then it was my turn to testify. Walking up to the stand felt like walking a tightrope over an open canyon. I swore to tell the truth, then sat down, my fingers gripping the edge of the wooden seat. Their lawyer came at me fast, asking loaded questions, trying to get me to admit there had been family discussions about the house. "Yes, we've discussed it," I said evenly. "Discussed Not agreed. He tried again. Would you say your mother wanted Daniel to have the house? I would say my mother never said that to me, and if she had, I still would have had the right to decide. I bought it. It's mine. His lips tightened. So you're saying you refuse to honor your mother's wishes? I met his eyes. I'm saying I refuse to let other people invent them. When Evan questioned me, the tone shifted. He asked me about the day I bought the house, the renovations I'd done, the lavender I'd planted by the front path. He let me tell the story in my own words. Not just the facts, but what the house meant to me. By the time I stepped down, my voice was steady, my shoulders back. The judge took her time reviewing everything. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear and firm. This court finds no legal basis to dissolve the trust or compel the transfer of the lake house. The property will remain under the sole control of Miss Clarke as trustee and beneficiary. Case dismissed. The gavel struck. Just like that, it was over. Daniel's pen stopped clicking. Harold's face was a mask, but I could see the muscle in his jaw twitch. Neither of them looked at me as I gathered my papers and walked out. Outside, the winter sun had broken through the clouds, spilling light across the courthouse steps. Evan shook my hand. You did well in there, Anna. You didn't let them rattle you. I had a good lawyer, I said, smiling for the first time in what felt like weeks. That evening, I drove back to the lake house. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the water reflecting every shade. I made tea, wrapped myself in a blanket, and sat on the dock until the stars came out. It wasn't just quiet. It was peaceful. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you've finally, truly stood up for yourself. For so many years, I'd been the one to give in. The one to keep the peace, even if it cost me my own happiness. But not this time. This time, I'd kept something for myself. And in doing so, I'd kept a part of myself I thought I'd lost a long time ago.